Please welcome back to the stage Doug Rothwell, President and CEO, Business Leaders for Michigan.
Patrick did a fabulous job. I told him the reason why I thought is because it applied to everybody in this room. Could take something that he talked about this morning and bring it back, which is great. So I said earlier today, maybe the one thing that we're all happy about being here is the election's over. It gave us a heck of a lot to talk about. But you know, the one thing that I think, again, this is all about going forward is moving forward. What are we going to do in terms of building our future for our businesses, our communities, our state? And what I want to do today, as I've done at every other summit, is to kind of talk to you a little bit about the state of our state. How well we're doing, the progress we're making towards being a top 10 state, and more importantly, the things that you can do to try to help make the state the top 10 state we want it to be, and some of the practices you can learn. So we're going to release our latest benchmarking report in a few weeks. We're not going to do it right now, but just because with the election and all, we want to let things settle down a little bit. But let's start by seeing how Michigan's doing towards becoming a top 10 state as we give you a preview here this morning. So this chart shows the progress we've made growing employment, incomes, GDP, and population over the last 5 years. And I think what you can see is that on 3 of the 4 measures, we're moving in the right direction. In fact, we've raised our annual unemployment rate from worst to 31st best in the nation, and it looks even better if you look at it in the most recent monthly rate, which actually rises to 22nd best in the nation. Now that's terrific progress, and it's something we should celebrate because it took a lot of hard work for us to get here over these last 5 years or so. But the one thing I want to remind you of is that we can't confuse progress for accomplishment, because on 2 of the 4 measures, we still rank average to below average among the 50 states, and on the one that we actually rank the highest, population, other states have begun to pass us by. Here's why top 10 matters. This slide shows how many more jobs, earnings, output we'd be producing if we were a top 10 state today. Think of it this way, being top 10 is kind of the difference between living and thriving. But the fact is, living feels pretty good when you've been on your knees, which is kind of where we were a few years back. So how do we accomplish some of the success that we've seen over these last few years, and what does the data hold in terms of store for us, in terms of where it might predict we're headed going forward? We track about 50 different indicators to try to answer those questions. But before we get into too much data, I'm going to ask you to take a pop quiz. So get out your phones and give us some feedback in terms of where you think Michigan stands on some of the metrics that we track. So again, text the number or keyword on the screen that matches your response, and text it to 22333. Okay, so there's the first question. Give us some feedback on where you think Michigan ranks for the percentage of our local government's direct expenditures that are used to pay off debt. Okay, I think a pretty clear consensus, and the answer is you're a well-informed audience, because that is the right answer, 34th in the nation. Let's go to the second question. 4th graders that are testing proficient in reading. 29, 43, or 61% of 4th graders. Again, a very well-informed audience. These are too easy for you. 29%, which ranks us 46th, by the way, in the nation. Pretty sad. Let's go to the next question. What's it cost the average Michigan driver per hour to be stuck in traffic? Well, you actually underestimated this one a little bit. It is C, more than $800, and that ranks us 42nd in the nation. And finally, the last question. We spend $22 per capita on economic development to attract and grow jobs. Where does this put us? Higher or lower? In the middle compared to other states? And again, well-informed, good answer, and the answer is that actually puts us around 30th in the country. So, based on all the metrics we track, it's clear that Michigan has become a much more cost-competitive state over these last 5 years. For example, we now rank 11th in terms of having the best corporate tax climate. We rank 13th best overall in terms of the business tax climate generally in the U.S. And we've also improved our balance sheet quite a bit. For example, we've made a lot of progress reducing our retiree health care costs at the state level. It's tracking in the right direction. Making Michigan more cost-effective has really been helpful, particularly to our auto and manufacturing sectors, which have really been the drivers behind the improved economy here in our state the last few years. But while Michigan's become more cost-competitive, we aren't making as much progress improving the value that you get for locating here for those costs. And the reason why that's so important is that we make choices based on the value we get for our money. I mean, if price was the only thing that ever mattered, no one would ever buy anything besides the lowest priced item, no matter what it was, and no one would live in places like California or New York. If you followed our work, you know that we have a comprehensive plan to build a new Michigan that's focused on the steps we need to take to compete, invest, and grow our state. And we've included a copy of it in the packets that you have at your tables today. I've just shown you how well Michigan's competing according to key cost measures. During the next few minutes, you'll see how we're doing on how well we're investing and accelerating our growth. We all want, for example, good-paying jobs, but those jobs increasingly require an education or training beyond high school. A strong pipeline of educated and skilled workers is going to be critical to our future, but the news here isn't all positive, unfortunately. We rank, for example, 46th on 4th grade reading scores, as we just found out, 37th on 8th grade math scores. We ranked at just 42nd for the number of high schoolers enrolled in technical education classes, which is kind of amazing for a state like Michigan. We're in the bottom half of all states, 36th for the percentage of our high schoolers who are deemed college or career ready upon their high school graduation. And we're just 29th for overall education attainment. There is no way we can grow this state if we're going to have a talent pipeline with these kinds of scores. If we want more good jobs, we need reliable, efficient, state-of-the-art infrastructure that gets people to where the jobs are and the products to market. Michigan currently has the 40th worst urban roads in the nation and the 43rd worst traffic congestion. Now, the good news is we do have the second best broadband speeds, but many places don't have access to them as much as we'd like to see. Good jobs are created through innovation. Ideas are the lifeblood of our economy, and fortunately, Michigan's got a lot of great assets in this area. We rank, for example, 10th in patent development, 5th for university research and development, 26th and rising for venture capital availability. And those strengths contribute to the high rankings that you see up here for exports, for new businesses, and for entrepreneurial activity. But a state's ability to grow and attract good jobs is also a product of its economic development efforts. Unfortunately, we're not doing all we can in this area. As I just mentioned, we rank 30th in what we invest in economic development, and while the most important sectors of our economy are actually doing better than the national average, we know from our research that they still aren't producing as many good jobs as they could if we leveraged their assets better. This map shows where growth is expected to occur over the next 15 years, with the darker blue shaded areas growing the fastest. Michigan's colored mostly in yellow or light blue. That means forecasters think that we're going to experience very little to modest growth. Now, we could hope that they're wrong, But wishing won't make it happen. We have to take actions that make forecasts like this wrong. You can see up here the consequences of Michigan not growing has caused. We've gone from being the 8th to the 10th largest state. We have the 40th oldest population in the nation, and because we're not seen as a vibrant growing state, we're not even attracting a lot of out-of-state students to come to school here in Michigan. 4th lowest number of out-of-state students of any state in the nation. If these trends continue, we simply are not going to be able to build the talent pipeline we need to be able to fill many of the jobs that our employers are going to be creating in Michigan. So the good news is that the data tells us what we can and should do to overcome some of these challenges to get to be the top 10 state we want to be. The first is, let's do everything we can while the economy is still healthy to really make sure that our state's fiscal and cost competitiveness is preserved. We can't afford to backtrack where we've made the most progress these last 5 or 6 years and see the next recession destroy what it took us so long to build. And that means addressing things like the billions in unfunded liabilities, healthcare benefit liabilities we've promised to government employees so that they can get the benefits they were promised and we don't leave an IOU to our children to have to pay off. Placing limits on how much local governments can borrow so we avoid the need for emergency managers in the future. And establishing in law some of the great fiscal practices that have been put in place in state government the last few years, like, for example, getting multi-year budgets passed by June 30th on time, assigning a cost estimate to every single piece of legislation before it's considered for passage. If these things make sense to you, there's a way you can help. Legislation, for example, is being considered in Lansing during the lame duck session to strengthen local government finances by addressing unfunded liabilities. You could call your local legislators and say you support them addressing issues like this. You've heard of the adage that a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, the single best way to prevent fiscal challenges is to grow the economy, of course, but growth requires very deliberate action. Ask most business executives, and they'll tell you the names of too many other states, and nations for that matter, that seem to want to grow good jobs more than we do in Michigan. We're often not as aggressive, user-friendly, or forward-looking as our competitors are. In short, we're not as cohesive. We have coalitions and alliances, it seems, for just about every cause under the sun. Well, what about if we actually created one for supporting the public policies and attitudes and outlook we need to create more good jobs in this state? What about adopting economic development tools that are just as competitive as the states that are competing against us? Our competitor states are spending as much as 7 times more than we do to grow and attract jobs, and those are states that are performing better than we are. What if we worked to attract and grow good jobs consistently, year after year, through election cycles and through changes in elected leadership? If we did this, our guess is that Michigan will be the kind of place people say throws out the red carpet for job creators. And here's a way that you can help. There's a package of bills, Senate Bills 1153, 4, and 5, that will establish an incentive program that's transparent, performance-based, and predictable, that will help us attract and grow more good jobs for our future in Lansing, in the Senate right now. Tell your legislator that you support passage of that legislation. Growth also requires focus. We're fortunate, as I said earlier, to have so many great assets in this state, more than most do, to grow good jobs. Our auto, our engineering, our higher education, life sciences, logistics, natural resources sectors are all producing more jobs and more goods of what the world needs than the average places are. But like a good business, we've got to reinvest and invest in those assets if we expect them to keep producing in the future. Michigan, for example, is doing some of this. We're building the American Center for Mobility out at Willow Run Airport. We're marketing that mobility expertise through the Planet M branding campaign. We're supporting the Pure Michigan campaign for tourism and building the new Gordie Howe Bridge for logistics. But more actions like this, targeted, focused on the assets that are so great for Michigan, need to be done in the future. Growth requires investments. A state commission very soon is going to issue a report identifying that there are billions of dollars more that Michigan needs to spend every year to invest in our infrastructure. This is going to cost every one of us that uses that infrastructure more money. But I think all of us know that we've not taken care of our roads, our bridges, our water systems. We've been living on borrowed time for some time now, and we can't really afford to delay any further. I hope you'll be ready to support those proposals when they're made so that we can move and make progress going forward. And lastly, growth requires talent. More Michiganders with an education and training beyond high school, schools that do a better job producing an education, training programs that do a better job once people enter the workforce, more students coming here to get education and training to grow the talent pipeline. In short, we need better education outcomes. And to get better outcomes, we have to know how we're doing versus other states, not just how we've improved year after year after year. And that means establishing high student standards for our students and benchmarking that progress. Right now, efforts are underway at the State Department of Education to change the test we give students for the third time in 4 years. Changing it again is going to mean that it will be years before we know how well our students and schools are doing. Here's another way you can help. Call the State Board of Education and say that they have a responsibility to oversee the Department of Education and stop changing student tests and keep the current system in place for accountability. We try to give you, through forums like this, some real straight talk. The proposals we make to grow jobs and incomes are driven by the data that we see and the best practices that we learn about, not ideology, not anecdotes. We do this because we believe in Michigan, and we believe in what becoming a top 10 state would do for all of us. You can find out a lot more about our work by going to our website, which I encourage you to,